During the mixing phase, all of the separate recorded tracks are balanced in level and in the stereo field. Mix engineers often use plugins to add effects to individual tracks during mixing. Mixing can be one of the more time-consuming but creative parts of the process.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, now you should be able to hear me. Good times, we are back. So, magically, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't want to tell you this because I would be freaked out and think that I have some kind of superpowers, but magically, in that 30 seconds, I mixed this track. You can call Guinness Book of World Records and let them know about me. Scott Keeklack. All right, here's what we're going to do, folks. Again, I have fun with this. You guys have to have fun with it. It's fun when you do a good job. When you can't do a good job at it or you don't really know what you're doing, the fun part of it kind of leaves because I'm not making a product the band is happy with. So, we just finished tracking, right? Tracking, once I get that done, usually the band does what they just did. They exit. They give me time to actually mix it. So mixing is when I'm going to blend all the different individual tracks and the individual sounds that we have. I'm going to blend them all down to a left and right track that is then going to go to mastering. So we talked about three things today. Tracking, which is the recording process, which you just witnessed. Then we're going to do the mixing, which is next, and editing. You can see it's cut up a little bit different. And then we're going to do the final step, which is mastering, and our instructional designer, Keith O'Neill, is going to do that with you, an amazing mastering engineer. So he's going to do that with you after I'm done. So what I want to do is deconstruct this mix and kind of show you what I did. So you remember what you just heard, right? A few minutes ago, I'm going to play you from the verse what this one sounds like, and you'll notice a little bit of a difference in it. First of all, it's going to be volume will probably be 1.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so special about that day. Even your emotions had an echo, so much space. And when you're out there without a care, yeah, I was held up.
So, let's talk about what I did to this mix and why I did what I did to this mix. Now, this takes a lot of time, folks. Tracking, most of us strive to be a mixing engineer. That's what we try to end up being. It's a difficult position to get because it's first of all, subjective. It depends on your clients and the people you work with to tell you whether they like what you're doing or not. There are many clients that I mix for that just don't like what I do with the mixes, and that's okay. If they say, hey, you know what, Scott, you tried it, doesn't sound like we want it to sound, I will happily suggest somebody else that I know that might be able to do a better job. Since it's subjective like that, I'm not gonna really take it personally. It's just what the artist wants and what I gave them, and even if we get together and sound, we work together, sometimes it's not gonna come out like they feel it should come out. So that's okay, we all fail, and there's a lot of failure when it comes to mixing because your first mixes usually don't get approved. The artist usually doesn't go, wow, Scott, your first mix and that was great. That usually doesn't happen. Usually it's, now we don't like this, we're gonna get somebody else to do it. But what I wanna reiterate to you guys and make sure you understand is don't let anybody push you off this path. I was not great at this when I first started, tracking or mixing or any of it. What I was good at is working. I wanted this really badly. So I got into a school, and a school like this changed my life. When I got into school, I did the best I could possibly do. I soaked in every minute, and I took that and I went and started an internship, and from that internship, I turned it into a 10-year career of just being at that one studio. And it was an amazing time. I learned a lot. But without that work ethic, it's just not gonna happen. So you've gotta really, really say, I'm gonna get into this and I'm gonna do it 1000%. So let's take a look at the mix real quick. First thing I wanna show you, Keith is actually going to master this track. So if you look here, I have what's called the L2 Ultra Maximizer on the master track. What this does is this actually does a pseudo mastering of sorts. What Keith is going to do with it is going to be much better than this, but what this does is it allows the listener before it gets mastered to hear kind of an idea of what it's going to sound like when it's completely finished. So again, when I mix this down to a left and right track, Keith in mastering is going to take that left and right and he's going to polish it, clean it up, stereo image, limiting. He's going to do a lot to finish the product. So I think that's a really necessary step. Those of you that don't quite know what mastering is, Keith's going to explain it to you, and it's definitely a necessary step. So what I did, if you listen, I'm going to play a piece of this track and I'm going to bypass it. Listen to your volume. Listen to what happens, how low it gets. This is without the maximizer.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so special about that day. Even your emotions are neck.
So what it's doing is it's just popping the mix out a little bit. It's making the mix a little bit louder, and it's adding harmonics and brightening it up a little bit and limiting it. So all this is happening within this one plugin. But I definitely want to turn this plugin off while I'm mixing. I don't want that on. It's going to be the very end, just, hey, let's pop it on and see what happens when it's in mastering, but I'm not going to mix through it. So some mixers, a lot of mixers start in a different order. We all do it differently. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with just the drums. So I'm going to do Shift, Option, and Mute, and I start with the drums. For me, it has to be the beat. The beat is what makes everything sound. I need that beat, and that I've got to build the house from the bottom, I guess I could say. And once I do that, I'll go and I'll start popping the vocals in. From the time I work on kick and snare, the vocals come into the mix. The reason why is I want to make sure, first of all, we know what the song is about. The song is about the words and the vocals. That's what it's about. I love all you other players, and you're very important to the song. But what people are going to grasp onto and grab onto are the lyrics, and they're going to sing along with the melody and the lyrics. So the melody and the lyrics have to be audible, they have to be clear, and they have to be sitting back in the music. What I mean by that is when I build this mix, I want to build it big enough, where big meaning full, that it's full enough where that vocalist, Zoe, can sit back in it. She's not sitting on top of the music, she's back in the band a little bit. And if I do this right, it should turn out that way. So let's start out with kick drum, and I'll show you what I did. So again, deconstructing means that I'm going to take things off and put them back on. Now what you're going to notice is not drastic changes. You're not going to go, oh wow, I heard that that's so different than it was before. That's exactly what I don't want to do when I'm mixing. When I'm mixing, the producer, the engineer, let's say I wasn't the recording or tracking engineer, they dialed in this kick drum. They EQ'd it, they selected the microphone. This is how they felt it should sound. What I don't want to do is go in there and turn EQ so much that it changes the whole timbre of the instrument, and they come back in and they go, whose kick drum is that? That's not what we recorded. So I've got to be very careful not to overdo the processing on these drums or anything else. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see the kick drum, and we're going to take a listen to the kick without anything, and then I'm going to add in this processing while it's playing to see if you can hear the difference. So if you noticed, you probably noticed a slight difference in volume and a slight difference in clarity. I'm going to show you what I did with the plugins. So I used two different plugins, and I want you to see the order that they go in. The way Pro Tools works, and again, something you learn in classes here, and something I teach in my mix class, it's very important, is the clip, this piece of audio that I have highlighted right here, that clip is actually what feeds the inserts, which are these slots here, and they go in order. They are in series. So they go in series, and then they come out the output, which is the volume. So this has to be a healthy level in order to feed the inserts properly, which means all your plugins work the best they can and they work to the optimum way that they should. So right now, if you look at what I've got going on here in this kick drum, I boosted almost 5 dB of 100 Hertz, which is a low frequency that I want to push the speakers a little bit. Then I also boosted almost 4 dB of 4K, which will give it the clarity. Now by doing this, I turned them up almost the same. They're almost even, but I added a little more low end to it. I didn't change the kick drum. It's the same kick drum, but bigger. It's hitting a little harder than it did when they left. The point of a mix engineer is to make this song come to life. And what I've noticed in my career is I have watched the engineers that are aggressive with it. They're not afraid to turn knobs and push buttons and what does this do? Those are the ones that I repeatedly saw at the studio. So I finally got it, like, hey, wait a minute, if I'm aggressive with this and I just make it sound like I want it to sound, then maybe I'll get more mix gigs, I don't know. And it absolutely happened that way. When I started going, hey, I don't care if I'm adding 5, I don't care if I'm adding 10 dB, I don't care if I'm subtracting 10 dB, whatever makes it sound right is what I want to do. That's the bottom line. When I hit play, what does the song sound like? So I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get there. So this EQ right here, this is called a Pultec Eq P1a. This EQ, the hardware version is amazing, meaning like a version you see here in the outboard rack. The software version is amazing too, and there's a couple different companies that make this plugin. There's a Waves version of it. There's also a UAD version of it. Universal Audio, I'm a big fan of. I love the Universal Audio plugins. They sound great. UAD plugins, I also need the Waves plugins. Those two bundles and then whatever Pro Tools comes with, I'm good. If I've got those two sets, I'm good to go. Definitely a huge UAD fan. So with this, I used a couple different plugins. So I used a stock Pultec here and added this EQ is known for low end. It's very good in this band. So again, how do I know that? Out of all these selections, look at this. These are just EQs that are available in Pro Tools. Look at this list. I'm just going to let it scroll for a minute. So you can see how many EQs are here that I need to know which ones to go to and what they do, and it's still going. I need to know this. This is important for me. How do I learn all this? How do I figure all this out? I take time in these rooms and I sit here by myself and I figure out how to make a kick drum sound good, how to make it do this. The only way to do this is practice, folks. That's it. So this is the one plugin I chose because I know it's good on the low end. Transient Master is a plugin that does great with attack. It pushes things out and makes it really pop. So if I solo, I'm going to solo this kick again. See how we can go too far with it? So you can go too far with these things. You've got really incredible tools. You got to know how far to go. And again, that's just experience mixing. That's all it is. So I added this equalizer before this Transient Master because I know the frequency boosts I did here are actually going to feed that Transient Master and make it react differently. So that's what I did to the kick drum to make it punch a little bit. Now that was the mic that was inside. Let's listen to the sub kick that was on the outside. So people hear that and they'll go, Scott, why would I want that in my mix? It doesn't sound the greatest, but what it does is that low end that it's got, it makes the speakers excurt. It pushes them. So the kick drum doesn't just go boom, boom, it goes doo, 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 and it moves air. It's important that that kick moves air. That's what I want it to do. So that sub kick adds that in for me. So what I did to it is I added a little bit of what's called H-Comp, which is a Waves plugin, and I'll turn it up a little for you so you can hear it. Minus 10.7. I'm going to pipe and put it back in now. So it just gave it a slightly different color than it had before, and it leveled it out a little bit. I didn't want too much of this sub kick in there, but I wanted enough and I wanted it to be level. So that compressor, what I'm using now, it kind of pushes the waveform down at the top and the bottom, kind of squeezes it so it'll stay more level in the mix. And compression and EQ are your main tools, and reverb and delay. Those are the main things I kind of need. But again, I can make just as many mistakes with these things as I can doing the right thing. So it's all experimenting. Take this knob, if you don't know what it does, and turn it. Just go like this and see what it does. What do these knobs do? I can't tell unless I turn them. And I think initially when I first started in this, I was very timid and I wouldn't turn knobs and push buttons. Just have the speakers low so you don't blow anything up, and hit some knobs and figure out what it does. That's the best way around it. All right, so I did that with the kick. So that gave the kick, this is what it was. I'll give it to you the way it was. So this is with no treatment on it. And then I'm going to put the treatment on it. So just slight changes. That's the key to mixing. I'm not trying to reinvent the kick drum. I'm just trying to bring it up and make it a little more solid in the mix so it sounds a little better. So once I get the snare in is where we're headed next. We're going to head to the snare drum. Oh, what I wanted to show you is phase. There's something that people don't realize can cause big issues or make your mixes sound fantastic. So what I want you to know is when I zoom in, notice how this waveform is not cut exactly where that one is, because this bottom waveform was slightly out of phase with the top waveform. Now you might say, well, why is that? It was on the same kick drum. Because of time of arrival. If I've got one microphone inside the hole of the kick drum, but I've got another one outside the kick drum and a little bit farther back, the time of arrival is not going to be the same. So I probably duplicated playlist, I'm guessing, and I'm going to look real quick if that's one of them. Zoom in, and you can see, as I move over, you see how that's slightly out of phase? I'm going to check to see if there's another one that's farther. There's one. That's a little bit too, that looks a little bit too far to me. That looks like another take, but it looks like this take would probably be correct, where it's just not quite crossing at the 0. Notice how that's slightly off. Some people might go, dude, you're crazy. It's not going to make a difference. Move that so this lines up with this, and watch the difference. You would be shocked. Sometimes it does amazing things, other times it doesn't do much, other times it doesn't do anything good, and I leave it alone. But I check this on certain instruments to make sure that phase is correct. What that did for me was it tightened up the kick drum. Now the compressions and rarefactions, which are the lumps, this is a compression, that's a rarefaction, compression, rarefaction. So you can see those. When those are lined up, that's in phase. If they were opposite, it would cancel each other out and make it sound really funky. So I just look at these things. Ideally, I want to do this before recording to make sure there is no issue. But now with the digital workstations, I can just flip it and invert the phase really, really easily. So I did that with the kick drum. I also did it with the snare drum. So if we take a look at the snare, now I've got a few more plugins on the snare than I've had on the other ones. And I'll make these tracks medium so you know which ones I'm working on. Actually, I'll make it large. There you go. So with the snare drum, I also want to point something out in the kick. I'm going to solo it real quick. Take a listen to this. So you hear the little bit of snare bleeding through. That's called bleed. Because that snare drum is in the same room with the kick microphone and the sub kick, it's all in the same room. So whatever you do in that room is going to be picked up by almost all the microphones. Some engineers fight that. They try to cut every little snare hit that's in between those kicks out. I don't do that. I kind of use the bleed. It doesn't bother me. It's a natural sound of a drum kit. So I don't go in and do what they call gate and try to get rid of all those little noises in between. Because then when the track does open up or the clip pops in, it changes the feel of the drum kit because something was muted and unmuted, muted and unmuted. So I don't really do that. I use the bleed to my advantage. I think it sounds natural. So you'll notice in here also, let's listen to the snare drum real quick. You hear the kick drum and the snare mic. Well, the snare mic is right here and the kick drum's right down there. Of course it's going to bleed. But again, I'm not worried about it. It's a natural sound for me. I'm not going to go through and gate all that out. I think we'll make the drum sound weird later. So what I did do with this snare drum is I've got a lot more plugins on it. I did check phase with this too. Now again, if you look, there's a down, which is a rarefaction, and a down that's a rarefaction. Up compression, up compression. They're not exactly the same because this is the top of the snare drum, this is the bottom of the snare drum, the pink one. So those are different responses. The microphones are going to respond differently. So they're not going to be perfect, but at least they start off in phase. You can see one spot where it's almost out of phase, right there. They almost meet, so that's going to cause a little bit of a phase issue, but that's bottom and top snare. So what I did on the snare drum, we'll take a look. I cleaned it just before the intro because there was nothing being played there at all. But if you look, I used quite a bit of plugins on this. And again, I'm not somebody that wants to process a lot, but I'm also not somebody that's going to not let it have whatever I need to make it sound good, I'm going to do. So if I have to use multiple compressors or different plugins, I'll do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up all these different things we have going on. So what we have here is we literally have the Harrison EQ, which I'm adding a little bit of 5K to get that snap out of the snare and out of the rim shots. I am actually boosting a touch of low end right around, it looks like 200 hertz or so. So you might think that 200 hertz, why would that be in a snare drum? That's absolutely there. The frequencies go that low. So the way you can tell is you could actually take an equalizer, put a plug in on a snare track, and if you can boost or cut a frequency, then it's in there. So if you're not sure if there's 100 hertz in a snare drum, put an EQ on it and boost 100 hertz. If it boosts it, that means it's in the actual clip for it to pull out. So if it's there, it will either boost it or you can cut it and you can tell if that frequency's in there. Easy way to tell if there's a frequency inside a certain sound. So with this, I've got the EQ going to an Spl Transient Designer, which is a UAD product, which is a lot like the Transient Master, but a little different flavor of it. So again, sometimes I'll choose different ones for different types of instruments. Then that's going into the, Harrison is going into the TLA, I'm sorry, it goes into one step of compression. Then it goes into the Transient Designer, which gives it a snap and a pop, and then it goes into another compressor. So now we're talking about a signal that went zero compression on the way in, but it's now got compression before, it's got EQ, then compression, then a transient designer, which is going to pop the sound, and then more compression. Well, why two compressors? I remember the first time I saw an engineer do that, and I was like, what are you doing? Why do you have more than one compressor? Now I've realized what's called step compression. Step compression means exactly what you're seeing here. I'm compressing it a little bit on this first compressor, then I'm compressing a little bit more with the second one. So what the first one doesn't catch, the second one catches. But at very low ratios, what that means is when that needle's moving, if you watch this needle real quick, It's barely moving. And the compressor here is barely doing anything. So one is catching a little bit of 2:1, while this one is at 3.2. So this one's a little bit heavier ratio, which means it will take a little bit more, it can take a little bit more hit, and it will squish the sound a little bit more than it does on the first compressor. So I'm being soft with the first one, the TLA 100, and then I'm being a little more aggressive with the FabFilter Pro C. So compression into compression, step compression, something we all do. Because if I just squish a sound with too much compression, it doesn't sound as lifelike. It sounds kind of flat and it loses its appeal. So we like to step it down rather than hit it hard. So I use 4 different plugins on that, which is not something I normally do, whatever it calls for. So let's take a listen to the kick and the snare together so you can see what I did. And then on the bottom snare, all I did was a little bit of the UAD Tube Tech compressor, which I absolutely love, and I put a little bit of the Pro compressor after it. So again, 2 steps of compression on this. Let's see what kick and snare sound like. Okay, so that's the rim shot. Let's go to the section where we actually have snare. Sounds like a drum kit. So everything's sounding pretty good to me. But now, what did I tell you we need to put in? Vocals, right? So we need to put these vocals in. So I'm going to go to Zoe's vocals, and I'm going to take off some of the processing. I'm going to take off a little bit of the effects, just so you can hear it a little more dry. And I'm just going to play her vocals with the kick and snare and see how it sounds.
Well, does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy?
So you see how that snare is almost interrupting what she's saying. It's almost covering her up, but it's not, because she's still able to pop through. So right now I'm on a good path because the drums are big enough where she can still sing through them, but she's back in them. It's not, if the drums were too small, meaning they're not full enough or hitting hard enough, they'd be too far back and she would be way in front of it. It doesn't sound like a proper mix. So getting the instrumentation to be big and full is a huge part of mixing, because I want her to make sure that I can sit vocals back in it. So that was kick and snare. Hi-hat, I don't think I did too much crazy to. Mag EQ, UAD, awesome plugin. I love this one. What I like about it are the 2 top bands. I like this air gain band they have here, and I like this high mid band that they have here. The rest of it's great too, but these are what I kind of seek out when I come to it. When I think of something to brighten up high end, I usually use those bands, and this EQ works great. Also the BF76, which is a standard Bomb Factory plugin that comes with Pro Tools. This is doing a little bit of compressing. So let's take a look and see what it's doing. I'll solo it for you. So see how that hi-hat sounds really consistent, and the snare drum is actually down a little less than it was. I think if I take this off, you're going to hear the snare more. Let's see. See how the hi-hat was it's a little bit aggressive, in a sense that it's kind of up. You know what, I'm going to loosen a little bit of that up. I think I want it with a little less. And that's very common in mixing, where I might make a decision and listen to it again and go, I don't know. I took it off, I kind of liked it a little better without some of that, so I'm going to loosen it up a little bit by turning the... That's a little better, so I like it a little better. So again, it's not that you have to get it perfect right away. You just got to make the whole thing go together. So as I'm going through this, as I'm adding more sounds, the mix is going to change. If I add bass, that kick drum might not sound the same anymore. A mix is a blend of all these tracks together, so they actually interact with each other. As one sound is added, it may change the way another one cuts through a mix. So I'm constantly making changes up until right at the very end, when the artist and the engineer, or the artist and producer, sit down and say, yes, Scott, I'm happy with that mix, that's done. Now again, it's not up to me. I'll do the best job I can do, but it's up to that artist and the producer to say, yes, this mix is finished. It doesn't matter if I think it is or not. It's about the artist always, and about the song. So whatever the song needs, I'm going to do, and whatever they need. So let's take a look at this. Now the next thing, we just did hi-hat. The next thing was ride cymbal. The ride cymbal, there was only one part at the end that he played. I'm going to play it for you just so you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the ride cymbal. That's that cymbal that was on the right side of the drums that I had the separate mic over. That's that one. Now he only did that in one section of the song, but it turned out that the overhead mics that were above the drum kit picked that ride cymbal up perfectly, so I didn't need it. I always want to record that. I can always mute it and do what I did just now and not use it. But if I didn't record it and the artist said, hey man, at the end, like boost that ride cymbal up, and I went, uh-oh. I don't want to have to boost the overheads up, or now the cymbals are going to change and the overall picture of the drum is going to change, the drum kit. So I want to have that separate in case I need it. It just worked out that I didn't, so I left it muted. So next thing, toms. Now notice with some of these you see a little bit of editing, meaning that ride track I just showed you. I just cut off the whole beginning of it because there was nothing there but bleed. The rest of it I haven't really cleaned up too much because I like it to be natural, the way it comes out, the way it's recorded. But with toms, that's a different story. So with toms, I actually clean these. So what I mean by that is I actually cut out everywhere but except where they play. The reason why is this. I'm going to show you what the tom track sounds like when you don't clean it. So right now, if this is the original tom track, let's say track 15, no, 14, there it is. Listen to all the noise and the bleed that's happening here. That's just an open microphone. All I really want is this. That's all I really want is that tom hit. I don't want the rest of it. So what I did was I went through and I cleaned every single tom hit. Now I cleaned these a certain way, and I want you to see what I mean by that. I put a small fade right at the beginning. So if you look at the beginning of this, you see this fade that's in the very beginning of it. A fade is exactly what it sounds like, either fade out or fade in. In this case, it's a fade in. If you look at this line is the volume ramping from 0 to all the way open. What I don't want to do on something percussive especially, or really anything that I'm putting a fade in on, unless it's on purpose, I don't want to do this. If I do that, I just softened the initial attack of the drum because the volume is ramping up. It's not actually getting the full attack. So whenever I do any kind of fades like this, I'm just fading it before the actual hit starts, just to make sure that when it crosses that playhead as it's going across, that it ramps up instead of just being on, because it could cause a click or a pop. A click or a pop in digital world is bad, and even in analog world it is, but generally why I say that is if there's a little click or pop here, as we compress everything, we're squishing down the waveform, but we're also, the things at the bottom are now louder than they were. You're not just pushing down the top, it's squishing the whole waveform, which brings things up from the bottom. So if there's clicks, pops, or weird noises, they get louder as we mix. So I did this for every tom. Now also what I want you to see is where I ended it. If you notice, the fade is about halfway the length of the tom, and it fades out much bigger than the one you saw in the intro. Fades out right here at a kick. Notice where that kick hits? I want to fade this out so the person that's listening, the end listener, doesn't notice that this tom just went boom and stopped. If I do it where a kick drum hits or a snare hits, your mind goes right past it. It doesn't notice that something ended because it hears something hit. So if you watch this tom, listen to where it ends. That would have been a kick drum right there. So I fade it so it's smooth. You still hear a little bit of bleed coming through the fade, but then it's natural. That's how it should sound. So that makes that track clean. Notice I hit it here and here also. So I did it for the same thing for high tom and low tom. So that's the other track. So I did that for everything. Now, so far we've added a little bit of reverb, what's called reverb, to the snare. You can see this 1 right here. The 1 is bus 1, and bus 1 is actually feeding an auxiliary track. Now again, some of you right now are going, man, I'm lost. Right, you just haven't practiced or done this enough. That's all it is. You'll get it. You just got to sit down and really put your heart into it. So I'm going a little quick. Again, abbreviated version. I'm just touching on what we really learn in school here. So what I'm doing with this reverb is I'm using this to branch off a piece of that signal and send it to this reverb unit. Now this reverb unit, some people will scoff at me right now. They're going, oh, deverb is terrible. I think it works, but I usually use room 2. Room 2 I think works the best. Now be aware that the gain defaults to -4. Just make sure you push that up to 0 before you start. Makes your sends not work as hard. I don't have to push as much to it. So I'm just using a medium room with a 1-second decay time. So that's how much time that it actually dissipates when it hits. Doom, doom, doom. How long does that reverb last? That's what I'm determining here. Now I don't do that mathematically. I do that by how I feel it, how it feels, and how long in my mind should that reverb tail off. I do the pre-delay mathematically. So the pre-delay, why I do that mathematically and what it does. Pre-delay does exactly what it says. It delays the signal from going into this reverb box by just what I have set up as 19 milliseconds. How I got that number, I divided the BPM, 60,000, divided by the BPM. Yeah, there's a little bit of math in this too. So 60,000 divided by the BPM gives me a quarter note delay time. If I divide that by 2, that's an eighth note. Divide it by 2, 16th. Divide it by 2, 32nd. I keep dividing it down until I get within a range of about 20 to 50 milliseconds. If I want it to sound natural, quote unquote, where you don't hear it. So what that does is when that snare drum is hitting, the snare hits, it hits the reverb unit says, hey, I'm waiting 19 milliseconds, go, and then it lets it go. So that 19 milliseconds, which is so close our brain can't even really define, like hear that. But what it does is allows the dry signal to go through the mix first, and the reverb is just slightly behind it. So it allows for clarity, it allows things to pop through the mix with reverb, but it's not washed out. So the pre-delay I do many, many times mathematically. And you can really play with it, and you can go up higher. I could do, instead of this, I could do 38. 38, you would hear it go, and it would wait. If I went even twice that, I could actually get up to where it would go, and it would happen later. So I can use that as an effect too, but in general, I'm just setting this, because this is a live band, I'm only using one reverb, because to me it's one space, they're all together. So that's what I'm doing with this reverb. So anything that you see bus 1 on is actually sending to that reverb unit. So it's only one reverb unit, but I've got the hi-hat, a little bit of the hat, and which is not normal for me to do. I did that because I felt like it must have needed it at some point. Again, no normal, there's no rules. I do whatever I think is right. The snare has reverb and the toms have reverb. I'll turn the reverb off on this first tom so you can hear what it sounds like without it, and then you'll see the artificial space that I'm putting into it. About anything. This is it with reverb. So that artificial space sounds like it's floating in a room that it wasn't really in, right? So I'm creating an artificial space by doing that. Now on the toms, no surprise, I used a UAD version of the Pultec EQ, which sounds a little bit different. This sounds a hair different than the darker blue one I was showing you. So I used this one, on this tom. I used a maximizer from UAD, Precision Max, and it's turned all the way up, 100% and 100%, because that's when it made it sound the best to me. And I'll a pop. That's a little pop, sorry about that. So I'm going to turn these off. That was the raw tom. So again, slightly bigger, slightly brighter, a little more bottom, a little more attack, and then into a transient master again. The transient master works with transients, things that hit hard, it pokes them out. So again, I just used a touch, it's only 9%, but that little bit just to make those toms pop out. So let's hear with the kit with this tom in it, actually the kit with these two toms. Right? Sounded pretty natural. So I had them panned, panning is left-right information. I had them panned just a little bit to the left, 43%, and a little bit to the right. If you look at my mix, this brings up a great point about panning. There's a few things that should be up the middle in my opinion. Kick drum, straight up the middle. Snare drum, straight up the middle. But you go, yeah, but when you look at a drum kit, it's over to the right a little bit. I'm creating a bigger than life picture, and I want that snare drum coming out of both speakers evenly so it's big and hits hard. So I'm going to have kick up the middle, snare up the middle, bass guitar all up the middle, lead vocals all up the middle. Everything else, I'm going to slightly pan off the center. So I want to leave that center lane for kick, snare, bass guitar, and lead vocals. Everything else, pan it. Doesn't have to be 100%. Can be a little either way, and I'll give you an example of the keys when I get there. So far it looks like we got the drums sounding pretty good. We've got to add in our overheads, and then let's actually poke the vocals back in once we get the overheads in. So the overheads were the two microphones that were over the top of the kit, the two condenser mics. So let's take a look at those real quick. So these, I'll solo them for you, let you hear what they sound like by themselves. Now they sound a little thinned out, right? Because I told you I wasn't going to roll anything off. Well, roll off meaning filtering the bottom off. Or if you look at what I did here, I cut a lot of 500 and a little bit of 500 and almost all of 250 out of it. And I think that's because the snare was changing the way my snare sounded. So a lot of times engineers will start with the overheads and then add the rest of the drums in so they don't get kind of the effect that I got. When I turned it on, it changed everything, but I kind of know that and I anticipated a little. So I'll go through my drums kind of one swipe, then I'll add the overheads and I'll go back through them. And in mixing, you're constantly doing that. You're going back through, and you might mess with the kick drum 200 times before it's over, maybe more, or anything else. So I rolled it off because I want it to sound good in the mix is what I'm worried about. One thing to realize when you're mixing, it's not about what something sounds like in solo. It's completely the opposite. It's what it's about when these instruments play together. When the whole team gets on the field, is everybody playing their part? And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, yeah, but look at me, I'm the safety and I'm the greatest. You're playing with the rest of the team, so I got to make sure you do your part. So let's see what it sounds like in the within the mix. So this is it by itself. Notice adding a little bit of reverb to it. So I'm making the overheads just a little bit roomier than they were. And again, just a decision I made. Let's see what it sounds like. Let me pop in Zoe's vocals.
You're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
Notice sitting in those drums, right? I almost want to pull her up a little bit, but I'll see what happens when we get everything else in. So I've got the drums in. Overheads, all I did really was I used R compressor. If you haven't used R compressor, it's one of the most transparent compressors I've used. That and the UAD TLA 100 is awesome. Very clean, clear. All they do is hold it down. They don't do any kind of color, which is sometimes what I'm looking for. Other times I'm looking for color. So let's see what it's doing.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
So it's mainly just catching some of those snares that are coming through, but I've also got a little bit of EQ, just a touch of a 10K shelf. What a shelf is notice it's got this symbol. That little symbol means that it's boosting or cutting everything above, or actually a little below, but we won't go into that, that gets a little deep, but a little above this frequency. So at 10K and above, if I'm boosting this or adding frequency, it's adding 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, as high as this EQ goes. So a shelving EQ is literally shaped like a shelf, and it boosts or cuts everything that you're doing from that frequency point on. So let's just take a listen. Also, Renaissance Axe, another one I use quite a bit. Guitars, it works great. It pops things out really well. You're gonna hear me say that term, popping things out. I want my mixes to be aggressive. I want everything to be heard and everything to be strong. So I use a lot of plugins that do add color and flavor like this one. And I'll bypass it and I'll show you what I mean. So this is without it, and I'll just do one side. I'm gonna take the groups off real quick. See how that just gets a touch more aggressive than it was? That's what I'm looking for. And you're hearing me use these terms because I want to make sure you guys understand what the concept of mixing is. It's bringing this song to life and put your heart into it. And if you do that, you'll be surprised at what you can do. But you've got to spend the time learning this stuff. There's no fast track to learning how to mix. There's none at all. It's just time. So I did that with the same things at the bottom. I also used the API again to roll off those frequencies. So I had 4 different things there and a little bit of reverb, the same reverb. So now we go to the room mics. The room mics here are the ones that were in the back of the room. Let me turn groups back on real quick. Go to room mics here, and I'll show you what the rooms sound like with no processing. So this is just those mics that were in the back. So those are the mics that were in the very back of the room, kind of by the wall, right? It doesn't sound like it's very roomy, does it? Because it's a small room. It just picked up the drum kit from a few feet away, so there wasn't that much room in it. If I'd put a drum kit in a room like this, it would sound a little bit bigger because there's more room. So I would have moved those mics back a little bit. But in this case, it's just giving me a little bit of the overall drum kit from a distance, which I can blend in. And if you notice, I didn't use much of it. It's only at 19.1. What I did do is I added a little bit of reverb to it to give it that fake space that it really didn't have. Listen. When I stop it, I'll turn it back up for you. Now I'm going to take the reverb off while it's playing. So I'm creating a fake room with the rooms. So not uncommon to do. Again, whatever I've got to do to make this thing sound correct, that's what I'm going to do. So that worked to me because again, what matters is not what it sounds like by itself, but what it sounds like in the mix. So let's take a listen. I didn't do much to this processing wise. I did a little bit of the Renaissance Axe to pop it, and I did a little bit of the solid state UAD SSL compressor, which is awesome. So I just did a little bit of this. But listen to it in the mix while you're watching these plugins.
That day, even your emotions had an echo, so much space.
But it's sounding full. That just added a whole another dimension, and all I'm doing is adding this little bit, 19.1. So all of it is this. Now I'm gonna unsolo it so you see how big the rest of the drums are.
Even your emotions had an echo, so much space.
So the drums are sounding good. I'm pretty happy with that for now, but again, what you're not seeing is the time it takes to really do this and the dedication it takes to doing this. If you're the type of person that can sit in a room by yourself and work out puzzles like this, because that's what I feel like a mix is, a big puzzle, then this is a great thing for you because I just love it. Like I said, I'm totally addicted to this. And it's what I do when I'm not here, and that's when you know you found something you love. When you leave the place you work, which is AIMM is a fantastic place to work, I leave here and I go straight to the studio. I love it that much, and that's what I hope you guys find by watching this today. All right, so let's take a look at the old bass. So we're take a look at the bass, and I used quite a bit of processing on this too. Again, I try not to, but whatever I did for a reason. Let's take a listen to the bass by itself. Now, if anybody can hear this at home, there's a little bit of an air or a little bit of a clicking sound in there. You're going to notice it more as I turn all these plugins on, because now what I'm doing is I'm bringing up, I'm pretty sure I added a little bit of high end to it, and I'll show you what I did. So I did the SSL E channel EQ, which is this guy. This is another great UAD product. Love SSL, common name you'll hear in recording. It's an awesome, consoles are great, plugins are great. But what I did, notice that I added almost, it looks like maybe, I don't know, 8, 9 dB of almost 4K, which some people go, that's crazy. I wanted the clarity of the bass to come out. There are no rules. I will do whatever I need. A lot of times I'll spin the gain, I'll turn the gain up, and I'll do what's called search and destroy and move the frequency knob until I find the frequency that's unwanted or wanted, and then I can either cut it or I can boost it. So search and destroy is something we talk about a lot when it comes to equalization, because you can destroy things with equalization if you don't understand what you're doing. If you use it too much, or you don't, what I call, we all do, we bypass our EQ. I'll play it with what I did, and then I'll bypass it and see how much I changed the original sound. Because what I don't want to do is change the original sound too much. I want to make it better, but I don't want to make it different, and that's the hard part of learning EQ. So I used a little bit of boost here, didn't really cut anything. I also used a little bit of compression. So watch this yellow meter here at the bottom, that's the dynamics meter. So I'm getting a little compression there, but wait a second, why do I have a second compressor on it? Oh, I just heard somebody yell? Right, step compression, that's exactly right. Step compression. So if you watch, a little bit of compression here, a little bit of compression here. So, but you hear that little ticking is coming out now more than it did, because as I compress, that stuff is going to come out a little bit louder and a little bit louder. So I used 2 compressors and a little bit of EQ. I also use what's called a C4, which is a multi-band compressor. So it can compress 4 different frequency ranges all at the same time. Again, some of this is going to look so foreign to you, but I promise you can learn it. Listen to it real quick and watch what this is doing. So what this is doing is compressing the low end more than anything else. I picked a frequency of about 108, and it's compressing everything from that 108 and down. So as that low sub stuff is hitting, it's just holding it down a little bit. It's not killing the sound, it's holding it down. So we're looking at now 3 different compressors used on this. I'm using a multi-band compressor and 2 regular compressors. So 3 different And I use this kind of funky, I don't know what this is. I mean, it's an EQ, but this is weird. Vitamin is kind of a strange plugin, but it works really well on certain things. And again, how did I learn that? By scrolling through all those plugins, popping them up and turning things. And this one works really well on the high and low end, but it's just different than other EQs. You kind of just push the fader up and you can change the frequency range that it's in. So this one I used also, I boosted a little bit of high mid at about 2500. So that's just one signal of the bass. That's not the other three. That's just the one. So if we look at the other ones, I used a Lin MB, which is another multiband compressor. Notice that I'm changing up the compressors that I'm using and I'm changing up the EQs that I'm using. The purpose of that is even plugins have a signature sound to them, some of them. If I use the same plugin on everything, the mix starts to sound like that plugin. So I want to kind of change it up and use different ones. So even though I used the C4 on the one above it, I changed and used the Lin MB, the Lin multiband on this one. So I used a multiband compressor, a little bit of Bomb Factory 1176. So this is now, here was the direct signal. Here's that line out, the one that came out of the head. It's a little bit different of a tone than it was before. Definitely different than it was before. So that tone is, again, a second flavor of the same performance. Then I've got the microphone also. So here's the mic. So they've all got something special to them, but notice the blend. One's at -6, one's at -16, one's at -20. So I favored the direct signal over the other two. That's my choice. And now let's hear the bass in with the processing, with everything, and the vocals.
And when you're out there without a care, yeah, I was out of touch. But make me crazy. Just that make me crazy.
So everything's coming together nice. That bass is handling the subfloor, the low stuff, and the kick is handling just above it. I also added something else here that I wanted to discuss with you real quick, is saturation. I put a little bit of overdrive on the bass. So listen to the bass through this little overdrive pedal. So you might think, why would I put that in my mix? Your telephone cannot reproduce 80 hertz. It can't reproduce the low frequencies that this bass guitar is playing. So in order to hear a little bit of the bass line out of your phone, what a lot of us do is run it through to an overdrive pedal or a little bit of distortion or fuzz or saturation, and we put that just underneath. So it's very low, but if you play it off your phone, you'll still hear some of those bass notes. So that's kind of why we do it. Again, I want to check mixes on multiple sets of monitors, headphones, earbuds, anything I can get my hands on, my phone. I email my mixes to my phone all the time to check them. So I put that on there. Notice you won't, I guarantee you probably won't even notice this in the mix. Listen with everything playing.
Make me crazy. Does that make me crazy?
So that's just a little trick to get things to show up on a computer or a phone, is just to use a little bit of saturation. Let's get to the guitars, which I don't think I did anything, well, it looks like I did. I did a lot of craziness here. So what I want to show you on the guitars is a little effect that I did. I also used, let's take a listen to them real quick. I'm going to turn the groups back on. I also used, so I used an MEQ, which is a mid-frequency EQ, added a little bit of 4K to that. Didn't look like I dipped anything too much out of there. No, added a little bit of 300, so I added some frequency. I'm kind of an additive person where a lot of mixers are, they cut more, and live I think I cut more than I do in the studio. But a lot of times you want to get rid of the unwanted frequencies first and then look for the happy stuff or the stuff that you like frequency-wise. But for me, a lot of times the sound aren't big enough, so I go ahead and I add to it, where many engineers will do subtractive EQ rather than additive. I tend to be a little more additive, and that's just an argument we all have as engineers. I don't think there's any right or wrong, whatever works. So I used the MEQ, I used the Renaissance, I used a little bit of boost at the top, 9.8. And I used the Manny Marroquin EQ, which added just a touch of 12.5s, just a little bit of that top stuff, what we call air. I used a little bit of an R compressor, and I'll show it to you without any effects on it. So no plugins. And then here's what I did to it. So I put a little bit, there's almost like a little bit of fuzz going on it now, and it made it sound a little more aggressive to have it have that little bit of fuzz. So I think that's probably why I did it the way I did it. I think it was this Maxim that probably gave that side a little bit more of the fuzz. That's a maximizer that will make it a little more hard sounding and move it up. I hit this one a little bit harder than I hit that one because they're two different microphones. Same performance, two different mics. So with guitar, what I did want to show you is a delay that I have on it. So right now, the guitar, what we deal with a lot of mixing is call and answer, meaning that I have one instrument like the keyboards you're going to see. I have one pan slightly to the left. I have another one pan slightly to the right. The main key is here. The horns, banam, are the other key. So this one's going bam, bam, banana, banam, answer. Bam, bam, banana, banam, answer. So the fact that they're moving from left to right with the call and response makes the mix kind of come to life. So it's not an uncommon thing. Well, what happens when I have one guitar and I don't really have anything playing off of it? So I did pan it to the left because my main key is on the right, but I also wanted to add some dimension to this mix because there's not that much instrumentation in it. So what I did was I kind of caused my own call and response by using delay. So listen to the guitar, and I'm going to stop it and listen to what you hear on the right side. Delay is repeats. It's the repeats that are happening. I have those panned, which you may or not be able to hear at home, but I have that to the right side. So the guitar is on the left, the answers are on the right. So those little repeats that I'm doing are allowing the guitar to almost call and answer itself or give it a thickness that it didn't have before. That's more of a psychoacoustic effect. It's an effect you're not really going to go, oh, I hear that delay on the guitar. It's just going to sound like the song is a little thicker than it was. So watch when I play it in, see if you can detect the delay at all.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah.
Don't really notice it, right? It kind of disappears in the mix, but it thickens it up. So that's, again, didn't make this stuff up. It's just things that I've seen over the years that I feel work pretty well. And that's a good way to just kind of give this mix a little bit of a thickness that it didn't have. Now with the keyboards will run direct, meaning they will run into direct boxes the same way the bass was, and then they come straight in. So there's not a whole lot signal flow-wise with them. But what I did on Aaron's keyboard, which was the main key throughout the whole song, is I used this Kramer HLS by Waves, which I like this for the top and the high mid band. They sound really good. It also can add a little bit of saturation, meaning you can make things sound a little bit more gritty by using the preamp section. So that's something I'll mess with occasionally too. So right now I brightened it up. I also used the AIMM pusher, which is I think it's Infected Mushroom, if I remember. This is a crazy one. But this one I used also with it. And this, I love the push. The push is almost like a little bit of a limiter where it'll just push the sound, and then I have Magic cranked, which I don't even know what this does, but it made it pop out in a different way. So a lot of times, I can't explain exactly what the Magic knob does, but I know I came in here and I turned it all the way up and all the way down. What is that doing? Is it doing something I like? If it does something I like, I left it. So it's not, I don't go to this plugin every single time, but it worked well for me in here. So again, trying different plugins, switching them up. And then I used a VC160, which is another compressor. So just to keep these keys down a little bit in the mix. Take a listen. So if you've noticed, some of you that are really paying attention to this may have noticed my compressors are not hitting very hard. They're barely lighting up. They're just barely touching, most of them, because I'm using more than one. With this one, I actually used what's called Audio Suite, and I put compression on the waveform itself. So that's something you're not seeing, but I actually did compression before this on the clip itself. That's another way of working in Pro Tools up here in what's called Audio Suite. So Audio Suite is a rendered plugin. It literally applies it to the clip and it makes a new clip, so you don't have to leave it in real time, which is on the insert. So right now, this keyboard, I added a little bit of distortion to it, or saturation. You can see right here, what I did was I added a little bit of the decapitator to it. So this guy, if you haven't used this plugin before, those of you that are fans, I love this plugin. This thing is awesome. It can get really crunchy, angry, and mean, and if you blend it underneath, it can sound really cool. So what I did, again, to make this sound a little bit more aggressive than it was, I put a little bit from a send from bus 15 and 16. I sent this to this track, which then goes through the decapitator and comes out. So see if you notice the difference with it in or out. You probably barely notice it. That's all it's doing. It's adding that little teeny bit of overdrive, and how I can tell, I can hear a little bit of that distortion in it, but the drive right here, I'm adding just a little bit of saturation to it to make it poke out. Nothing crazy, but just enough to make it cut through. So let's see how it sounds in the mix.
Something so special about that day. Even your emotions had an echo.
So again, it seems to be holding its place in the mix. Notice the panning. I've got this one leaning more to the right because I've got the guitar leaning a little bit to the left. So again, if you listen to the two of them together, you're going to hear the call and response that they're naturally doing just because they're playing different parts. Hear that? That call and response. The guitar's doing lines in between the keyboard, and it's moving left and right because I have them panned. Panning is an extremely important thing in mixing. You just have to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. There's no rules to any of this, like I said before. It's what you think is right. The only person that can tell you it's right or wrong is your client. If your client doesn't like it, then change it. But if you're happy with it and they're happy with it, there's nobody else that can tell you anything else. So the other keys were a horn line that we did. So let's take a look and listen to those, and we're almost done, folks. So what I did to those, a little bit of reverb to make them kind of float. I'll turn it off. Pretty dry, right? Doesn't sound like it's in the room with everybody else. Listen again. There's no tail on it, but watch when I put the reverb on. It floats a little bit, so that's what I'm looking for. I added a little bit of the API EQ, which I added a 4 dB of 12K, which is pretty high up there. We call that air. I wanted to get some of the air out of that, so it had that little high frequency. I just changed something. Help. Okay, I'm back. So then I also added the Ultra Maximizer. Again, not something I do on every channel. It worked here. It's something that pops out the sound. Then I added the Joe Meek EQ. Not really something I use very often, but it worked in this case for a little bit of high-mid boost and a little bit of high boost. So it worked there. So the last thing I did, so now let's hear the horns in conjunction with everything else, and then we'll get to the vocals. It's sounding like a mix, folks. It's coming together. So let's take a look at vocals, and then I will get you guys over to mastering because you've got to see that. I'm going to make this track large. I'm going to take everything off that I did to it and kind of explain quickly what I'm doing and why. Auto-tune, ladies and gentlemen, the magic auto-tune. Now, I will say this. Everybody thinks that, oh, you have auto-tune and you can sing. That's not how this works. Auto-tune is pitch correction software. That means if you are flat and we got to move you up a little bit, we can. We can fix the pitch that you're doing. That doesn't mean you have the believability and the delivery that we need to make vocals great. It's not just about notes. It's about the delivery, how you say it, how Zoe sings that when she's singing possibly and giving it everything she's got. That's what matters more than being a little sharp or flat on a note. That stuff I can fix. What I don't want you guys to do is be lazy about it and you go in the booth and you sing sort of good and then you just leave it for the engineer to fix all the pitch correction. That's not the way to do it. It's about your performance. When you're in the studio, it's your performance that matters more than anything. So perform, give it everything you got. And if you get it 94% and you need me to help you with a couple little notes here and there, I've got no problem with that. But it's not run in, sing it once, go to the mall, and I sit here all day and work on it. That's not how it should be. It's about you caring about your product and doing the best you can in the booth. So with auto-tune, I didn't use it that heavy. You'll watch it swing just a little bit. I'll play it for you real quick. So it's not doing a whole lot. It's pulling a little bit. I've got the tracking time pretty relaxed. The retune speed is really slow. Humanized very high, so it doesn't pull really fast and have the effect. So I'm using this in a natural way just to help her slightly with the pitch. Now I didn't have time to actually Melodyne this. A 30-second mix, this is pretty good. I'm proud of me. I didn't have time to use Melodyne. Melodyne is something where I could load this vocal into Melodyne, look at the pitch on a piano roll, and I can help it get there before it goes to Pro Tools. If I do that, I'm then feeding Pro Tools notes that are closer to correct, and Pro Tools doesn't have to work as hard. So I feel like that's the best way to go. I ask my artists if they want me to, should I Melodyne this real quick, go through and touch it up, then I'll let Autotune do its magic, and we'll see if that happens. But the two of them in conjunction work really well. So I did that. I also rolled off some of the bottom end. So you notice that this bottom end right here, I rolled off 75 hertz. There's nothing 75 hertz and below in her vocal at all. So I'm getting out the room noise if there is any. Then I added, if we go to the Focusrite D2, a plugin I love to work on with vocals especially. It's clear, very clean EQ. And again, I'm adding a little bit of 4K with a really wide Q, meaning that it's a wide bandwidth. It's taking not only 4K, but 3.8, 3.7, 3.6, all the way down and all the way up, 4.1, 4.2. So it becomes a bell shape, and the middle is the frequency. So it's taking side frequencies, which we like better as humans. So it sounds a little bit better when we have a wider Q. I'm also adding a little bit of that 10K shelf to brighten it up. Then I'm adding RVox. Folks, I love me some RVox. This plugin pops vocals out and pops most anything you put it on. It pops it to the front. So if I'll take this off real quick, and I'll just go ahead and show you quickly what it sounds like.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
So you can hear the vocal again, slightly moving up. It literally sounds like she takes a step closer to the speakers. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be right in there. So RVox is a plugin I use on most of my vocals. I love it. And it doesn't always work, but if you recorded vocals properly and didn't compress them too much going in, it works pretty well. So the Manny Marroquin EQ, I'm adding a little bit of 15K. And people might go, dude, we don't even hear that high. Trust me, you can hear this EQ. So if I can hear it, you guys better be able to hear it. So I add a little bit of 2.1, and this is kind of the polish or the shine that we put on like pop vocals. So if I'm adding 15K, it just puts that little bit of shine on it, makes it pop through. So I also added a De-Esser afterwards. A De-Esser is exactly what it sounds like. It's sibilance, the S's, that sound. It's going to compress that depending on the frequency that I have it set at. Now I have it at about 5K, and you'll see it when it hit S's just slightly compress the frequency. So what these are great for, a De-Esser, remember that you can use these plugins for anything. It doesn't say you can't put this on a drum track or an overhead track that's too bright and sizzly. I can compress anything. It's a frequency dependent or frequency, it's aimed at a frequency, but it's a compressor. So I can just have it grab that frequency. So watch when she hits some S's, you'll see it jump down a little bit where it says attenuation here.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
See, when she said wasn't because, you saw that attenuation. That wasn't, those S's were pulled down a little bit. The ones before that, she didn't cross what we call threshold, so it wasn't strong enough for this to actually react. So that's something that some engineers will put on the front of the whole chain, we call it, where it goes through Autotune, that's called a vocal or chain or a vocal chain in this case. Some people put it at the front, some people put it at the end. It really, again, it's up to you. But when you move plugins around in series, it can make them sound different. So I also added at the very end a little bit of my buddy, the UAD TLA 100, which I love. So watch what it's doing.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch.
So a little bit of compression here, a little bit of compression from RVox. I did do the same little bit of Audio Suite compression on this track. So this has actually got 3 steps of compression on it. But again, what matters is what it sounds like in the track. So if that's what it took, this is without it.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't.
So you can see I'm just popping everything out a little bit, slowly but surely. Let's talk about effects, and then I promise I'm going to get you over to mastering. So effects, we are going to use the same reverb, because again, to me it's a live band kind of in the same room. So I use bus 1. I'm going to unmute it and you can hear what the reverb sounds like.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. but it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
So you see that space that it's adding. Now again, you may sound like, oh, that sounds like a lot of reverb, but once it's in the track, listen.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch.
Doesn't sound like it has as much space as it did before, right? So that's another lesson in what we talked about earlier. Solo doesn't matter. It matters what it sounds like when the whole song is playing. So that worked. Now let's look at delay real quick. So I did something different here that I haven't done with the rest of them. I did what's called a static delay. So what a static delay is there's going to be a little bit of delay again as repeats. Reverb is space, delay are the repeats, repeats, repeats. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a little bit of a static repeat, kind of like we did on the guitar, but it's just going to float under where you won't even notice it's there. Watch when I play it with, this is just the delay.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch.
Hear that little bit that's on there? Watch, I'll stop it. That's how you hear effects when you stop.
And when you're out there without a gear.
Hear that little bit of repeat that's going on? That's going to be floating under her the whole time. But it's so far back in the mix, you're not going to really notice that it's there. It's more of what we call a psychoacoustic effect. It doesn't, your brain doesn't know what's happening, but it just knows that there's space in this song. And it's because it can't, your brain doesn't go, oh, look, there's repeats there. It just feels it as space. So listen to it in solo with the reverb now. The reverb's going to wash some of that out.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch.
See that? Sounds different now. Now with it going through the reverb aux and the delay aux, it caused it to sound different. You didn't hear the repeats as dry and as clear. So again, it gives me that depth without having to go crazy with it. So that static delay is on the entire song. You won't even notice that it's there. Another thing I did was the delay throw. Now delay throw, I used a different delay. I used H delay for this. I also used Galaxy, which I have never used before, y'all. I pulled this Galaxy tape echo up from UAD, and I just tried it. It was the first time I've ever used it, and I loved what it did. So for this one, I used H delay, which is a very common Waves delay that a lot of us use. I absolutely love it. So this one is for delay throws. Now, what a delay throw is when you hear delay, and I'm going to actually show this automation lane for you. Oh, I don't know what I just did. I'm going to show this automation lane. And I'm going to show you what I did with automation. Now, automation is not as scary as it sounds. It's just us being able to draw in the moves we want a fader or a send or a delay to do, and it just happens repeatedly without us having to work on it. And once I do it, it's done. So if you look here, you've got the send automation. I'm going to have you watch this send. Watch it go up. Now, right now it's at 0. When it goes past here, I'm going to take that end of that word and throw it to this delay where it's going to repeat it. That's where the term delay throw comes from. I'm only having a phrase or a word going to that delay so it repeats that one word. R&B, it's very popular at the end of phrases. Because you're the best in the world, world. I love you so much, much, much. That's where they do a lot of delay throws. It's to fill in space. So let's see what it does here. In solo, and I'll just take the other effects off. So watch this right here. You'll see this pop up.
Make me crazy. Does that make me crazy? Does that
So it's only throwing those words to the delay, which is a different ping pong delay. Ping pong means you're hearing it in the left and right sides bouncing back and forth. It gives it a different effect than it would just a straight delay. So I automated that just at the ends of words. You can see all the way down, I automated it for all the ends of these words. So that delay doesn't happen anywhere else but where the automation happens. So that's a great way to use automation for actual delay. Now the last thing I did is pitch shift. Now pitch shift, this is again, none of these tricks are things that I came up with. It's all stuff I've seen engineers do and I learned from a lot of great engineers. So what I did with pitch shift, and this is something I do a lot, some people use different plugins. I like the 2 or 2 plugin. Some people will use the standard Pitch 2 that comes with Pro Tools. So if you guys don't have the Waves bundled, you can use Pitch 2. What I'm looking for is right here, where it has detune, it has +6 on the left side, and it has -6 on the right side. Now that's cents. So that doesn't mean a semitone, like a half a step. There's 100 cents in a semitone. So I am literally pitching up the left side by 6 cents, pitching down the right side by 6 cents, which has the effect of widening something. So watch what I mean. The way it's on now, it's on very low. You're not going to hear it doing much of anything. So I bypassed everything but the pitch shift. So watch the amount of doubling that's coming out. It's hardly anything.
Oh, maybe I'm crazy.
Right? You don't really notice anything.
Oh,
nothing really to notice, but watch this.
Oh, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy.
So if you heard that at home, that just took a signal that was like this and went whoop and thickened it up. But it's so slight that it's not even the artists themselves are not going to notice this is on. It's just enough to take that signal and widen it a little bit. I put that on almost, I'd say almost every vocal, probably every vocal. So I literally drag that send 7 or bus 7, I will drag that to every single send slot on a vocal just to thicken them all up a little bit. Nobody knows the wiser. So even if I solo the vocal with no effects on it, which it is now,
Oh, maybe I'm crazy.
you barely notice anything. It's just enough where if you look on it on a meter, you can see it spreading it out. But really, that's all I'm doing, giving it a little bit of love. So right now, what I would do is when I'm done, and I'm pretty much done with the mix now, the band would either be here working with me, I would call them, I would say, hey, I'm finished, or I would call them maybe an hour before and say, hey, come on over at 9 o'clock and let's take a listen to the mix. They need to approve the mix. The artist, producer, anybody else who they think is important needs to listen to the mix, come to the studio and listen to it, or nowadays we send a lot of times. But I want to send a WAV file to them. I don't want to send them an MP3. MP3 is a lossy compression. It's not full bandwidth. So I want the full bandwidth WAV file. So if I have to use WeTransfer or Google Drive and just send them a link, share it with them, that's what I want to do. I do not want to send clients MP3s because the bottom is not going to be the same, the top is not going to be the same, it's not the same mix. So if they're making sonic choices or decisions, I want them to really listen to it. So I would just print the mix at this point. I would also save as to make sure I have a copy of it. So if I'm done right now, I would go to the end marker, and also I'm going to pop on my little pseudo mastering tool before I send it over to Keith so you can hear the difference. So right now this is the mix without the L2, and then I'm going to turn it on while it's playing so you can hear the difference.
And when you're out there without a gear, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
You can hear it boost up quite a bit. So at the end of the day, I'm going to turn that L2 on and I'm going to bounce my mix pass and I'm going to send that over to mastering. Now, when I'm printing for mastering, I should have said, this is going to be bypassed. I'm going to take that off. He does not want to have something that's already loud and added all that stuff to it. He needs it where it's at a good level where he can still manipulate it and boost it up and limit it and do all those things that they do in mastering. So just want to say in closing, thank you guys for spending time with us today at AIMM. I really appreciate it, and I hope this inspired some of you who haven't been introduced to this world before. I got introduced a little late to it, but man, I fell in love. Once I started in it, this was it for me. And I love, again, the musician side or the technical side, whatever works for you. Give us a call if you're interested in anything, but thank you for spending the time. And I'm going to send you over to mastering. So Mr. Keith O'Neill, make me look good, buddy. Thanks, y'all.